welcome to the breakout sessions. It's going to be a good one. You know, my panelists, you know, Matt Lee and Stephen Nichols, we've done this together a couple of times, and it almost feels like we're getting the band back together. So I just want to go ahead and bring up Matt Lee from Pax8 and Stephen Nichols, Director of NAM Solutions Engineering, and bring those guys up here and let's just start talking. Guys, come up stage.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask us to take a selfie.
Let's take a selfie. Let's do it. We're going to do the selfie. It's a little,
kind of my jam.
All right, guys.
Bear with me.
Say hello to us. Hey! All right. Nice. Okay. Gentlemen, please.
Oh, these are comfortable.
Wrong here.
Very nice.
You know, they're comfy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, that's better now.
Now you're in cybersecurity.
Yeah. Good. I feel like I belong in the right? All right.
That's awesome. Thank you. And it makes it special because I'm actually losing my beard tomorrow or Friday for charity. I'm at $140,000 raised to shave my beard at IT Nation Connect here in a bit. So,
yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and he's doing a great job. Woo! That's his high quality. Something
it's all over your glasses.
Something I never want to touch again. High quality. That's what that is. All right. So we, you know, this is a panel we've done before, but we need to know who everybody is, right? We need to know what's going on with everybody. And Matt, you've got. I mean, I have after my name a couple of initials, things I've accomplished and done, degrees, that sort of thing. You've got an entire alphabet repeated twice after your name, and it's a whole bunch of things. I mean, what is it? It's like C, I, S, S, P, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, C, F. You have a whole bunch of. Tell us what these things and why they're important.
I'm eventually just going to do it in chemical notation, so it'll be like C9. So I was at an MSP, for anybody that doesn't know my background. We grew that from 7 humans to 170 and over 40 million in revenue. And at that time, I was driving as the director of security and the director of technology, and my VP of operations said, Matt, how do I know you even know cybersecurity? I mean, I mostly know it from being punched in the face, unfortunately. But I started taking tests, and just kind of to prove that I could do that. I started in October of 2 years ago with my CISSP, which is the Certified Information Security Systems Security Professional, and then CCSP, which is Certified Cloud Security Solutions Provider. And then I went with CFR, which is the Cybersecurity First Responder. And as you see cybersecurity, you see it's typically broken into kind of the blue side of things, the operational side of things, the red side of things, and then somewhat of the purple middle, if you will, of merging those attack and protect surfaces. And so I'm drifting towards red certs. So in December, when I'm hiding because I have no beard and I'm not doing any live presentations, I will be taking my PNPT, which is a 5-day practical network penetration tester test. And so I just take 2 or 3 a year is what I try to do to just build up the certs.
I think you're just greedy for letters at this point.
True story. I really want to make chemical notation that looks like lysergic acid diethylamide from its length.
Right, now, why is that important? It's important because, you know, Matt's an expert in compliance. He knows what he's doing around this thing, so he's the perfect guy to join us on this panel. And Stephen Nichols, you know, his professional job is to make me look good because he handles the tech side of things. So, Stephen, tell us a little about yourself.
I've been with Acronis for a while now, and really, you know, day to day, my job is to make sure that partners understand the technology, they understand the risks and how it can be mitigated, and more importantly, there's a kind of an education role that's also involved, right? Because there's within the MSP community, there's certainly a lot of knowledge, a lot of information around security, but what you know today isn't going to necessarily be what things are going to be tomorrow or the next day. And so it's really a collaborative effort to make sure that MSPs are prepared to face those challenges. And I also think part of my role is connecting people at Acronis with what's going on in the field. So I get that feedback back from those partners and make sure we understand the challenges that they're facing, you know, the complexity of the tools that they're dealing with and all of that sort of thing, so that we can make sure we're doing everything we can to help them address those problems.
And you triggered me, of course, because there is such a huge knowledge gap. I teach a CIS class at Pax8, and I've taken about 100 MSPs through that. And I haven't had anybody walk out and go, wow, I'm really doing great in security. I've had people walk out and go, I don't know that I want to do security anymore. I had no idea there's this much that needs to be built that I have no inroads for and I have no runway for. So I think that you are really speaking towards where my heart is that if I can simply educate, if I can simply help people get there, I've got Tom Lawrence here too, he's another one of those big educators. If I can do that, then we can grow this collectively together. My mission is that if our children and grandchildren are going to have the same experience with technology, we can't keep losing trillions and trillions of dollars and making our data like it's in a sieve. So education is critical. If I can't do it alone, you can't do it alone, but the thousands and thousands of you can as a result. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a not only is that it is a key part of what I try to do, but it's also actually a really enjoyable part. I love having these conversations, and it's not just even about me imparting knowledge. It's about a knowledge share. I learn
story.
myself at the same time, so it's really good to get into.
still picking.
It's still, I'm still got that.
Welcome to my life on Friday.
Yeah. All right. So in the audience, who out there writes code? Anybody out there writes code for a living?
A couple.
Does some? All right. So there's a trend, not a trend, trend's the wrong phrase. There's a movement in whenever you're writing any code, it's called shift to the left. And what they're really talking about is this. They're talking about, it used to be that you would build a product, you'd build software, you would get it done, and then you would measure security and compliance to make, and treat it as a bug. It was like bug security by bug fix, right?
Right.
But the trend now is they say shift to the left. So what you want to do is you want to talk about security and data protection at the beginning of the project and through the entire product lifecycle. And this is happening in compliance too, am I right?
Well, I mean, I think you have this problem to solve that is somewhat unsolvable. And if you take it back even to like the Industrial Revolution, we had a car in 1860 something, right? We didn't have seatbelts until Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed in 1970 something. So you have this world where technology gets built first and security, protection, safety, things like that don't go to the bottom line. And I don't mean that negatively. God bless capitalism. Doesn't happen until it has to happen. Right? We used to lock women in a sewing room until 300 of them burned up in a sewing room one day. And now we have exit bars on doors. So I think one of the things that we're seeing is we're in that phase. We're in that renaissance of understanding that security has to be part of what we do. It can't just be something that's a tack on. It's not a tool. It's not something we add on. It is absolutely focusing on what am I doing? What risks am I creating? And I think what you're seeing is you've had such a low maturity consumer in technology, just like if I bought a car in 1902, right? It wouldn't have safety concerns as a conversation because that's not what the constituency understands. And so as you see that maturity rise, you're starting to see that demand at the capitalism level happen in private equity. You have the SEC now saying you need a board member that has cybersecurity knowledge as part of their current proposed.
Underscore that. The SEC, Securities Exchange Commission,
is
is now saying...
Yeah, in March they proposed a regulation change that says, you just like Sarbanes-Oxley, which happened after Enron, you now need to have a cybersecurity person on your board and have representation. And so as that trickles down, as you see that matriculated out and you see that change down, you're seeing that drive business to say, maybe we need to know about cyber. Maybe we need to understand the security and risk to our information systems and personal data. But to your point, you're starting to see the economic forces at play come first. Same thing, and we can get into a couple of them later, but you are seeing forces come to play where we can't keep losing this much money. We have to figure it out. And when you start getting at the SEC, the whole point is now you have a reporting requirement, you have to have enough knowledge to do what you're doing, and you have enough knowledge on the board to prove you should have known better. Right. And you're starting to get into the Martha Stewart treatment coming out as a result of some of those efforts. And we just saw it with Uber's CISO a few weeks ago where he was convicted of fraud for hiding an event. Well, the whole point is you have to prove someone had criminal intent. The way you would do that is have me sitting on that board and I would go, oh, that's going to get us in a lot of trouble. We shouldn't do that. That's bad. And when I would normally have been relegated in that role to a tangential board role, right?
It puts a focus of responsibility on an individual and that gets people's attention.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Stephen?
So the other thing I think is important is it has to be a security mindset. So everything that you're doing, you have to factor security into that.
Yep.
Whether it's developing a new process, it's when you're onboarding people into the organization, whatever it is, if you incorporate security, it's not an add-on, it's not a part of it, it is part of the DNA of everything that you do. And if you think about that, because honestly, MSPs themselves are becoming targets of cyber attacks.
Every day.
And so it's not just about protecting customers, it's actually building it into how you think about doing business. And then on another point that you were saying about kind of having it consumer driven, things that are changing is historically it's a lot of the MSPs that are pushing customers to adopt minimum security standards. And I've talked to a couple of MSPs at the show who are actually saying customers are coming to them saying, hey,
what should I do?
What should I do?
Yeah.
Right? And you talk about a knowledge gap today within MSPs. The knowledge gap for end customers is even huge. It is much larger than even it is for MSPs. So they're looking for guidance and for that trusted advisor role that of coming from the MSP around security.
Right, but there's a kind of a convergence here as well too. So
Yes.
Even just in a couple of months ago when we first started having these conversations, we were hearing people say, "Oh, compliance isn't a big deal for me. I don't do business.
I'm not subject to any compliant regulations.
GDPR. I don't do business in the EU. It doesn't really matter. Yada yada yada." But that's changed dramatically, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Continues to. And I think you have this conflation of security is not equal to compliance. And I've said that myself before. I'm changing the way I see that a little bit, in the sense that, in my mind, compliance is typically done to keep a contract. Compliance is done to make a contract. Compliance is done to check the box, if you will. And security is done to reduce the risk, to reduce the amount of loss we have, to protect our people, to protect our data, to meet some of those compliances. But oftentimes they're silos. They're absolutely separate of my security team, we do security stuff, and compliance goes, we do the compliancy stuff. Those are becoming quite conflated in the sense that if you're going to meet the goal of stopping the loss, like look at GDPR or one of the 24 currently in legislation privacy rules in the United States and different states, if you look at them, they're very loss-based. If you failed and lost data, you have a problem. It will cost X.
Right.
And so when you start getting into that, what we used to shoot for was the goal of checking the box, but that doesn't protect us now, because if we do lose the data, we lost the data. And so you do still have some degree of a reasonableness protection that we could get into later, but I think that the conflation is your compliance programs had better be there to support the efforts of the risk reduction techniques you're using on the security program, which means you have to now make them be either the same team, working in the same teams, understanding the same common goals. And so I think security and compliance are two halves of a coin,
Right.
if you will.
Right.
But they're getting merged now. They used to exist as separate blanks, if you will.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with that. It's we're also seeing even industries where they're not legally obliged,
Right.
but they're on the periphery of that. It is from a risk management point of view, but just from the ability to sleep at night, are starting to think about compliance as an important part of an extension of their security requirements, because they may be not as strict about being there, but at least they want to be aware of what that compliance risk might be.
Yeah, and I mean, we use compliance to say, oh, I am compliant with 800.171. I am compliant with whatever it may be. But even then, if you look at HIPAA, great example. I'm compliant with HIPAA because you have BAAs and you happen to have a security plan you wrote, great. So anybody aware, in October of last year, the Department of Justice stood on stage and said, hey, we are going to start using the 1863 False Claims Act as a weapon in the absence of legislation and regulation on cybersecurity. That's kind of the ethos they stood forward with last October. Since then, they have sued successfully under the False Claims Act a company called Rocketjet Aerodyne. Now, they actually settled out of court. They initially sued for $90 billion, I think was the number.
Wow.
It was basically...
What was that number?
$90 billion.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, it was in the B's.
Oh, wow.
And the point was they summated all contracts ever done through that, was part of how the False Claims Act was written. Basically saying, if you lie to the government in a contract, we're going to ask for our money back. It's essentially the concept over-summarized. But the point is that when they took that and sued Rocketjet Aerodyne, it was done from an insider whistleblower. A person said, they lied about 800.171. Now, personally, I've sat in the room with executives of multi-$100 million organizations saying, Matt, how long can I lie about 800.171? How long can I just check the box? How long can I have... So to take that story forward, 800.171 is a very easy contract-based thing because there's very, very finite things you must do. When you get into HIPAA, the Department of Justice also has said in June they intend to start investigating HIPAA breaches for reasonableness. To understand cybersecurity almost internationally, there's a term called the reasonable person rule. It's actually written as reasonable man, but I try to be more inclusive. But the reasonable person rule says if I took people and said, here's the actions I took, was it reasonable, and they find it to be reasonable, you've kind of met your burden for most things that aren't heavily contracted or heavily regulated, like 800-171, CMMC, things like that. So if you've met that burden, then it's about showing that improvement, showing that growth, showing that capability growth that you're getting, and a great way to do that is documenting the compliance of that, right? But the point is, they are going to attack the reasonableness. In HIPAA, it just says you have to have a reasonable cybersecurity plan. It's very easy to start attacking reasonableness. I could take CIS out and go, how many of these did you guys cover on IG1? None? 3 of them? 6 of them? Why? You shooting from the hip? And so I'd also add that in, is that as we start trying to merge security and compliance, try to follow those raw security frameworks and incorporate them into the things you're being compliant to, right? So if that's CIS top 18, the 56 IG1 controls, or 97 IG2 and 3s, or if it's something like NIST CSF or those things, that helps you guide that merger of those two. And so control 3 is what we're talking about here, right? Data protections, data classification, data management and protection, and some 11. But the point being, when you start looking at it that way, you can go, why would I do DLP? Oh, because it's part of Control 3.
Right. Who out there? We had in one of our tracks yesterday. We had a cyber insurance panel. Did anybody see that panel yesterday? Okay, good. So I want to bring that around because the convergence between regulation, general compliance, and insurability.
Yep.
It's the difference is becoming almost nothing. And I think you mentioned a case where insurance companies are actually suing for subrogation. Is that what you talked about?
No. So subrogation is the first thing that's always there, right? So for anybody that's ever been in a car accident, subrogation says that I'm Matt Lee, and my insurance company has the ability to subrogate as my identity for anything's harmed me. Now, they were the ones harmed. They were the insurer.
Right.
But they can be me for the purposes of suing others. That's traditional subrogation, a little oversimplified. But as you dig into that, they actually Travelers sued a company back in June to rescind a policy. The intention of that was to say, this policy was obtained via fraud, and in most states in the United States, New York gets a little funky, but in most states in the United States, if you have fraudulent, if I lied and said I wasn't a smoker and I was found to be a smoker, all they have to do is return my premiums. That's it, return of premiums.
Yeah.
And so in this instance, that company had received, I think, $3 million or so in insurance from a cyber event back in 2021. And they finally sued and said, you didn't have MFA on this one machine. You said you had MFA on everything. We're rescinding the policy. Here's your 12 grand in premiums back. We want our 3 million back, right? And they successfully settled out of court in about 4 days after they filed the suit. So you're starting to see this conversation of insurance. Anybody from data stream in here? Raise your hand. All right, cool. Insurance is basically organized gambling, right? Like at the end of the day, you know how many humans die of overweight and high blood pressure. You can pretty easily say, Matt dies at this age based on these data points, right? When you're dealing with cyber insurance, none of that's there. In fact, we've all lied to them for years. We've all said, oh yeah, I'm great at MFA. Well, on what? How many of you have done a business impact analysis and said, do we have MFA on all 72 applications we identified at this client? Well, you said yes on the insurance policy.
Right.
Well, wait a minute, what if one of those is the data leak? What if one of those is the things you said you protect? So we're starting to get into this world where the insurers have made a lot of bets. They've made a lot of covered calls, if you will, on that. And they've found themselves in a position where they're having to pay out. The loss rate is like 1.5, 1.7, 1.8 when they're trying to be in the 0.5s, 0.4s, right, from a return on their premiums.
Right.
And so
it's almost becoming, instead of an insurance policy, it's almost becoming an annuity against.
Well, I mean, in the sense that these companies are normally used to a certain loss rate, and they're getting crushed right now in that. And so they're doing everything they can to try to combat that. You see insurance companies that are wanting to put an agent on a machine so they can track to see if everything's set up. You see people wanting to get data to a SIM. You're seeing all of these clamoring effects, and it's a hardening market in insurance. And I think it's a great loss-win in the sense that as those companies get pressured by their insurance companies for non-renewals, I know most of you have already taken advantage of that. I know most of you have said, let's put in this project you've been putting off. Let's do this thing that you said you were going to do. But I still think those are baby steps in the sense that most MSPs I ever talk to, and you don't have to raise your hands, but have no written policies, don't have any governance on those policies, aren't doing anything to say, yes, I'm doing Control 3, and here's how I'm doing, and this is the Acronis piece, this is how we roll it out, this is the onboarding to your point of new employees. Yep. And so I think that's one of the biggest gaps that we're still a little ahead of, and it's not going to kill you today, but I think it's one of those things where compliance of that, being able to document the improvement. I tell people, start with a shitty policy. If all you can do is use your PSA as what every machine might be out there, or RMM, then write that down and follow it to the letter and prove you're doing it and then prove you've improved it and show those revisions and show that change. So I think what you're getting at is that insurance companies financial markets, banks, lenders, PE, stock brokerage, all of those are hardening markets around. You can't just say you're doing security. You have to be compliant. Even if it's to your own framework, even if it's to your own regulations that you have to start showing that working matriculation of that data and show that you're improving over time.
So Stephen, in a data loss prevention, DLP, what part does that play in a full compliance strategy?
It's actually a very important part because compliance isn't just about nefarious things, right? In some cases,
accidental employee leave.
Exactly.
I sent the wrong email out.
Exactly. We had a conversation the other day about DLP, and it could be something as simple as having data in a template that you had accidentally filled in customer data and you sent that out. It could be a case where an employee isn't aware they're not allowed to send that internally to somebody else.
Sure.
Right. There's all of those things, and so having first a policy of data loss prevention, right, so that it's clear and everyone understands it, but then you need the tools to be able to enforce that.
Yep.
And one of the key tools to that is the visibility, right? It's knowing what's even going on, because in a lot of cases, that data can be moving inside the organization. You could have an employee who's thinking of leaving and starts sending things to their personal account.
Yep.
There's lots of different places where that data can leak, and in the same way, from a security point of view, that you have to be worried about viruses and ransomware and things like that. It's all about protecting the data, right?
So is the security point.
Exactly. So they're related together. It's really, at the end of the day, it's about making sure that the people who should access the data can, and the people who shouldn't can't.
Okay, so
anybody want to call out what that is? The CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Those are critical components in security and compliance.
Compliance, correct.
So staying with you, Stephen, on this, because over the last several months, I've had conversations with a lot of MSPs, and you mentioned DLP, and I get this kind of head pull back and eye roll, kind of, oh my God, it's like they don't want to deal with it. So the impression I'm getting is that traditionally, the biggest challenge of implementing any DLP strategy has been it's very complex, it's very, very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of heavy lifting and maintenance. Is that true?
Absolutely. Particularly, one of the kind of challenges is, from that back to that triad, you kind of have two choices. You can either make draconian rules to make sure you're safe, or you can be very lax, and then it's not actually adding a lot of value. Because every business has, every customer has their own normal, level of where data should go, where it should. Some of the rules are obvious, right? About sending to external sources, confidential data, things like that. But so the MSP has to work, with the partner, with their customers, in order to be able to build that rule set, so that they can have the right level of enforcement. And not only that, but it's going to change over time. And you need systems that can where you have to go in and monitor and make sure everything's going on. And that's complex. It takes a lot of effort.
And most clients don't know where their data is. If you look at it, I watch people where they're like, oh, this is a shared SharePoint file. I'll just download it and then work on it. Yeah. You've just broken the whole point of how it's being shared. And so how do you find and discover where did that accidental spreadsheet that had sensitive information go? And especially if you start getting into Europe and start dealing with GDPR extensibility, now you've got to be able to delete that.
Right.
Well, where is it? How can you actually say you did? You can say I deleted it out of the system I knew I was tracking, or you can say I can do it out, but you can't account for those human failures and those human things where, users going to be users.
Exactly.
God bless them.
But you still have to have them so they can use the data.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. You can't put otherwise you can just lock it all down.
And you called out a good point. Alyssa Miller is a well-known CISO out there, speaker, and she was speaking at Wild West Hackenfest that I was at the other day, and she came up and said, "We're told so much that the language of business is risk." She said it's wrong. The language of business is money. The language of business is profit. The language of business is that. And so, to your point, you have to speak towards being able to meet the compliance and security needs as it flows, but also meet the business objectives, because business owners are in the risk. They've already bought the risk. In their mind, they are at business. They have the risk.
And if you don't do that, you run a much higher risk of shadow IT, people working around and not following policy.
Yep.
Where if the policy is there to make sure that things are being done properly.
And the technology supports the policy
Yep.
endemically,
Yep.
where it is, Brian Krebs says, make it harder for users to do the wrong thing and easier to do the right.
Yep.
And I think that's the point of doing a wide system type DLP product that has agents as well as cloud monitoring as those things, is because it creates more surface area from that reasonable person rule to say, yeah, I missed this one document, but my reasonableness is tested. I had all these things that I've done. I know it well. I know my goal. I know my objective. I can prove I've been doing it. And so I think that, to your point, making it serve business at the speed of business, even if that means you aren't perfect, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Right? And I think finding quick ways to discover large amounts of data, to classify and codify it, helps you make that faster achieved. Even if it's not perfect yet, to your point, where we need to spend time with the customer, talk to them about their data flows, change where it exists, train, drive changes in that organization. But good cannot be the perfect enemy. Perfect cannot be the enemy of good.
Don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good way to go. Stephen, we had a few minutes here. Do you want to show us a little bit about how we've implemented DLP for Acronis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I can show an entire demo, but let me share a little bit about kind of what we've done. The good news is, the Acronis booth upstairs, the SEs that are up there, we'd be more than happy to do a more complete demo. We can also book something after, but yeah, let me show you a couple of bit of the kind of how DLP looks from Acronis. All right, so we were basically logged in here, and first we talked about visibility. So there's a few widgets here kind of giving you a little bit of information very quickly that you can look at when you log in. But let's talk about how kind of easy it is to set up. So first of all, same agent that we're using for backup, we're using for all of the other security features, that same agent actually, we can turn on DLP. So if we go into the management, we go into a plan, I'm going to just quickly create a new plan. And if I scroll down here, just like all of those other nice little green switches, I can go down and we can take a look at data loss prevention. So the advanced data loss prevention, we just have a few settings, and this is kind of one of the interesting things. The first thing we can do when you start out, you've got the agent in place, we have a learning mode. So what that does is it doesn't interfere with business. It allows us to collect all of the information about the normal business processes. And it starts to basically say, hey, if it's really sensitive data, it's going external, we can make sure you have to justify that. But we're going to build a number of policies. Once you've got a kind of a running rate, you kind of know what's going on, you can change to enforcement mode. But that enforcement mode, we can actually also put it in adaptive mode. That means we can continue to learn as the business, all of those things continue to inform what those policies are going to be. So we have a couple of other settings that we can take a look at here. First of all, we can also build in things like optical character recognition. So if people are sending images of sensitive data, we can pick up on that as well. And then, as far as password protected files, we can't always actually see the contents of that file. So you can make the choice as to whether you want to allow that or whether you want to block that. All right, so let's talk about once we've got the policy.
And I think the point of that, just to jump in, is being able to say, I want to block this, and say, it comes down to your security posture and what your choice is. Do you want to fail secure or do you want to fail open? Right? And that comes back to supporting that business. Do you want to allow that document to go out and potentially have no protection or purview of it? Or do you want to stop it and say, I need to inspect this before we go forward? And that'll be a personal choice based on your own needs.
And then, again, once that agent's been running in the system for a while, you start moving things around. You have the basic idea. You have a sender, you have a recipient, you have a permission, and then you kind of have some actions that happen. So these actual data flow policies are automatically created by the system. And you can go in if you want, and there's a couple things we can do with these. We can certainly take a look at, we can edit them. So if you need to tweak them for some reason, because something got allowed that it shouldn't, you have complete control over that. But more importantly, we can actually view the events that are related to that. So this allows us to take any particular policy and get visibility into, and in these cases, these were all denied. They weren't actually, no sensitive data actually left. But we can now go back and see, hey, is there somebody who seems to be continually trying? Maybe we need to educate them a little bit more about the policy. And it gives you quite a bit of information. And that visibility is key when it goes, as well. You can show that to your insurance companies.
Well, those are your artifacts, right?
Exactly.
When you're dealing with compliance, you have to gather evidence and artifacts. And so a lot of this becomes that evidence and artifact to prove that the system is functioning, right? That's kind of the point of that, and that you're doing it. So blocked events are good for compliance in a lot of ways because you've done your job.
And so, when we go back to those policies real quick, one of the things that we can actually do, if I just pop into edit here, I can change the information, including what I want to do. And there's actually kind of a key thing here. You can add an exception in. So if you've got, you want to have a broad policy that says no one can send this type of data internally, then you can block that. Maybe there's somebody in finance or HR that actually needs to. You can put an exception in. Again, it's not blocking the actual legitimate business use of moving that data around, but at the same time, it's giving you the protections you need. Easy to kind of set up, and again, continually learning and adapting to that. So lots more to DLP. We can certainly walk people through a demo, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a teaser into how things actually work.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Stephen.
Perfect. Thank you.
So the primary component here, it's a notification and permissions and the notification system?
Yeah, so certainly
Well, it's classification.
It's classification.
I mean, that's the real point of it, is the classification of the data being done somewhat automatically, right, from that perspective.
Yep. And then if there is a case where, for example, somebody does need to do something that is outside of what the policy is, you can actually pop an alert up and they can justify right there in the business flow.
Oh, nice.
And be able to say, and depending on how you have the settings, you can allow them to move forward with that, or it can be a request. So, but generally, it again, you don't want to interfere with the business process, but you want to make sure everything's logged. You want to make sure you have the events, and you want to make sure. Sometimes when that pops up, that's the point they realize, hey, maybe I shouldn't be sending this.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe maybe I didn't even know
that
this
accidental data disclosure, right?
Exactly.
Not a concerted threat actor.
All right, so what we have is the same Acronis agent.
Yep.
It's already endemic to the system. It's already inside.
Yep. Right in the protection plan.
It can be turned on with switches.
Yep.
It's got a learning component, AI learning component inside of it to understand how you do business now, so it does not create a meaningful negative business impact on the operations to get started.
Yep.
And it's something easy to manage otherwise, and if something pops up, then you have total control about whether or not you allow that information transaction to occur or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
So,
that's pretty cool. All right, so real quick then, DLP, does every customer need it, or is this something that are certain industries more prone?
So are you familiar with the CIS and how it works? Okay, it's 1 to 18 on IG1, 1 to 18 on IG2, 1 to 18 on IG3. So 3 passes, 18 separate controls 3 times. It's control 3 of the first pass. So DLP systems and the ability to say what data is leaving and coming in and out of my organization is probably pretty endemic for every organization, in my opinion, in the sense that cybersecurity is not about Matt running a shell. Me getting a reverse shell or being able to break into your system, fantastic. I don't care about having access to your system. I want the data, that juicy, juicy data that exists. And so data classification and data protections come very early in Phyllis Lee. Phyllis Lee is the Senior Director of Security, or Senior Director of Controls, that's me. She's Senior Director of Controls at CIS, and Control 3 starts dealing with data protection. So yes, DLP is probably a necessary piece for everyone, especially in the United States and in Europe and in places that already have well-developed or developing privacy policies. You start getting into, it'd be very hard to make a win in a privacy concern without having some protections of that sensitive data, social security number, date of birth, things like that.
Okay, so let me just, I'm a simple guy, I'm a simple man, I have simple needs. Let me boil it down to something simple I can understand. So with Acronis DLP turned on, I would know if my marketing department were sending some designs to the external graphic designer, it would see that as a normal business transaction, see that file going back and forth. It's JPEG files, it's PNG files. It's not going to be a problem. It's going to let it go through. But I have a salesperson sending an Excel spreadsheet of all of our customer lists out to an external email. It would say, well, we may need to take a look at that. Does that kind of boil it down?
Absolutely. Right, so you take that personally identifiable information, and it's about being able to recognize that easily and classify it. That's one of the key things, because a lot of times, again, people may not know what they can and can't do. I mean, you can have a written policy in place, but if they don't understand, that data, they may be inadvertently violating that policy. And back to the question though you had before about, certainly, yeah, there's industries where DLP is, already a thing. What I would say is, if with the use of advanced DLP from the Acronis CyberFit Cloud, you have the ability to add that to a portfolio of services with a much lower lift. Why wouldn't you do it for all of your clients?
Right. Because I was just looking at it, and I was watching you walk through it, and it's like, okay, I think I could turn that on. I mean,
You could, absolutely.
Yeah, good.
Well, I think that's one of the things that, back to my perfect enemy of good problem is having some capability and starting to flex those muscles and getting it rolled out. And even if it's not everything, even if you haven't taken all of the tags that might exist in Office or all of those things and built policies, starting somewhere gives you some degree of reasonableness for that customer. That they took reasonable efforts to try to reduce the data loss and took reasonable efforts. So I think that it's one of those early ones that is an easy win. And then what you have to remember though is continue configuring, continue improving, continue being better. Testing, is this working? Am I failing? And I think people miss that a lot. But yes, it's super easy to roll out, and just make sure you always iterate and mature.
And what we just covered is it's not just because people in their heads may say, okay, this is just if I'm doing business with the government, or just if I'm doing financial services, or just if I'm doing medical information. There's applicability across virtually every enterprise.
I can sue you in California if you lose my data, right? Like those lawsuits are already playing out. And that's the interesting part. Depending on the way the privacy law is written, you might have 24 different ways you have to apply this, different states, right, as that continues to grow. So some are fine-based, some are lawsuit-based. And so you get into this point of, that's my data that you're protecting. And so, yeah, it's important, I think, to have DLP across most of your data surfaces.
And it's not just about bad actors. As we know, most of these types of leaks are accidental.
Correct.
Somebody's unintentionally doing the wrong thing. They unintentionally open the wrong file, unintentionally send the wrong file, but it creates a security issue for the company. So it actually protects the good employees too.
Absolutely, yeah. When you put the policies in place, because most places have some kind of policy you sign off when you're part of your onboarding, saying you can't do this.
Boilerplate and talks about floppy disks.
Yeah,
no,
exactly. But it's about enforcement, and more importantly, it's about visibility, right? It's about having that event log. It's about being able to go in and understand what is and is not working in the system. From your policy point of view, like I said, when I showed up there where it had been denied, right? So the enforcement was there. But in addition to that, you now have an ability to understand, hey, how come this person is trying to do this? Is this nefarious, or is it something where not nefarious, but still needs to be
better training, better policies, better process, whatever it may be, right? So, and I think that's the point. When you have that instant feedback loop, if you're a user that says, I just got denied sending this email because it asked me to justify it, you can make that part of your training feedback loop, and you can also make that part of your reasonableness, right? You're now making people give a reason for it. They're having to say, yes, this is what I'm doing, make them stop and think, and it goes all the way back to that, making it easier for the users to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong.
100%.
All right, so your team, Stephen, is up at the booth, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and there's 4 demo stations up there. If anybody just wants to get curious and go see it, they can just head up there and your team will just walk them through DLP.
Yep, absolutely. We'd be more than happy to do that. We can also schedule something after the show if you want to go deep into it, you want help understanding how you can implement it. Our team is here to make sure. We want you to be successful. It goes back to kind of what we were talking early, in the session. It's about education. It's about collaboration. So yeah, we're definitely, want to be part of you implementing that solution.
Great. Okay, well, now a comment now to the audience that's here. One of Jeff's rules is if you want to be thought of as smart and to look smart, hang out with smart people. So these guys make me look good all the time. So would you please thank my panelists, Stephen Nichols and Matt Lee from PAX 8. Really appreciate it. If you need anything, any help or any additional information, pop up to the Acronis booth. And I hope you're having a good time here at the event? It's pretty cool, right? Nice. All right, see you all later. Thank you, guys.